America is a land of great museums, and every museum has spellbinding stories to tell.
Photography is a pretty complicated subject.
People will always say to me, if there's George Eastman that was involved with the company, who's Mr. Kodak?
We have a collection of approximately 25,000 films.
Indeed, our collections are formidable, preeminent.
Picture perfect, the George Eastman House in Rochester, New York. Next on Great Museums. Major funding for great museums is provided by the Eureka Foundation, dedicated to the educational power of television and new media. Exercise your curiosity. Explore America's great museums.
George Eastman was not only a well-known businessman and philanthropist, but also a marketing and business genius.
He was a visionary, and his whole life is a demonstration that he was a visionary.
Born in 1854, George Eastman was a child of the new age of photography. He would become the founder of Eastman Kodak, the father of popular photography, and the inventor of motion picture film.
This great museum was established in George Eastman's house to honor George Eastman by collecting, conserving, interpreting, exhibiting those media that George Eastman established, film and photography.
By creating the first affordable, user-friendly camera, George Eastman gave photography to the world.
He created a process that allowed photography to be placed into everyone's hands.
Since we opened in 1949, George Eastman House has been the mecca of film and photography.
This is a place where you can come to study that history in that medium like you can no other place in the world.
The treasure trove at the George Eastman House International Museum of Photography and Film in Rochester, New York, includes over 400,000 photographs, more than 25,000 films, and an amazing array of machinery for making pictures, from thousands of lenses to an original Edison kinetoscope, lamp houses for magic lanterns, flash bulbs, and the lunar orbiter, designed and built at Kodak to photograph the surface of the moon.
It's a flying mini lab, if you would. It's a camera. The film was actually processed in the orbiter and then sent back to NASA using a television signal. Keep in mind, this is 1966, so it's very complicated technology.
In many other museums, you have to be able to go from building to building to building to be able to get the whole story. We have the whole story of the history of photography and motion pictures here under one roof.
The modern entrance of the museum's archive buildings and galleries literally links the history of photography and motion pictures to the life and home of George Eastman. Room after room, the 35,000 square foot mansion frames the story of his life and a legacy that is perhaps picture perfect.
Photography is a pretty complicated subject. What I like to see people learning is just what a vast subject it really is.
Our collection can show you what does photography look like in all of its myriads of form, from its very beginnings to today.
A visual history of photography itself, through the lens of some 14,000 photographers, professional and amateur, famous and unheralded, all speaking the language of light.
Every time you pick up the camera, you're making choices, you're selecting, abridging, condensing. The very point of framing and composing something is that we slice a piece away to focus upon what is our truth.
This is the truth told by George Barnard of Charleston, South Carolina, after General Sherman's famous March to the Sea. Here, Alexander Gardner focuses on the execution of the men who conspired to assassinate Lincoln.
They created some of the most important works that spoke to the devastation of the Civil War that has become part of our great visual recorded history of that event.
This 1882 image is the first successful photographic record of lightning, captured by William Jennings.
He was trying to disqualify the way painters were painting lightning with kind of this jagged edge in paintings. And so he went out with a handheld camera and he photographed lightning, and it did look different.
What began as documentation also welcomed imagination. This is the work of Julia Margaret Cameron, whose impressionistic style sought to align photography with high art.
As a Victorian photographer, she created works that were totally unique, based on poetry and atmospheric effects and accidents. She saw within the medium a prayer, as she put it, an art. She attempted to combine the two together in her work.
Yes, the George Eastman House is also a museum of art. Galleries showcase the beautiful, the intimate, the unique. Henry Peach Robinson's 1858 image, Fading Away, depicting the despair of death, is actually a composite of 5 different negatives. In this 1855 still life, Fantasies, French artist Henri Lessec brings a painterly eye to a photograph of a bottle of wine and a camera lens.
From 1949 to the present time, we have defined the field of connoisseurship. That runs in our DNA.
Lewis Hine heightened the drama of the construction of the Empire State Building. Alfred Stieglitz immortalized the hands of Georgia O'Keeffe. And the eyes of Dorothea Lange's migrant mother speak more than 1,000 words. At the Eastman House, the photography and technology archives are literally across the hall from each other, meaning the speed graphic Joe Rosenthal used to shoot his iconic image of the flag raising at Iwo Jima is kept only steps away from the signed print.
The technology collection at the George Eastman House contains about 16,000 objects. Probably 5,000 of those would be cameras.
Including the world's first bellows camera.
It's designed to actually be self-contained, so it comes apart in folds, and so it's portable. It's also a unique item. There is no other camera in the world like it.
Problem was making the images last. There was equipment to produce an image, but no satisfactory process to fix the image until 1839, when Frenchman Louis Daguerre perfected the first practical photographic process. The daguerreotype was hailed as a true miracle, and the Eastman House has the largest collection of daguerreotypes outside of France. This mirror-like image, formed by light reflecting off the subject's face onto a sensitized metal plate, is a daguerreotype of Daguerre himself.
I know that I am looking at light reflected from the face of Daguerre, impressed upon a light-sensitive surface. I know that that's captured in its time, and I am now holding, in my time, a telescope back to the time of Daguerre. It's an awesome experience.
Camera technology tends to be what I call evolutionary, not revolutionary. I would have to say that the Giroux camera would be the most revolutionary because there wasn't anything before it.
Introduced by Daguerre and Alphonse Giroux, this is the world's first camera manufactured for sale to the general public.
It's a fairly large double box or sliding box camera with a landscape lens on it. The camera also has a rather interesting seal on the side of it. It's a seal that was signed by Daguerre, and being the first commercial camera, it's also very significant, if not the most significant camera in the world.
The daguerreotype gave rise to a brand new profession that Americans were eager to employ. The team of Southworth and Hawes worked as portrait photographers in Boston between 1843 and 1861. This rarity is their sitter's book, face after face of Southworth and Hawes customers. Some are simply spellbinding.
It is a wonderful portrait that's maybe less a portrait than a wonderful kind of poetic view of childhood because of the way the little girl leans her head down and appears to be in introspection.
The museum also has the first camera ever sold in the United States, along with its proof of purchase. It was bought by amateur photographer Dr. Samuel Bemis for $76 in 1840.
It's the camera and all of the items necessary to make a daguerreotype plate. So it has the camera, lens, sensitizing box, developing box, all in a handmade crate.
But the basis of modern photography would be the calotype, the first process that allowed for multiple positive picture prints to be created from a single negative image, though the resulting prints had a very soft focus. In 1844, using his new process, calotype inventor William Henry Fox Talbot published his Pencil of Nature, one of the first books to use photographic prints as illustrations. In fact, the museum has works representing all of the photographic landmarks, including the tintypes that would remain popular into the 20th century. Miracles? Yes. Affordable and user-friendly? No. George Eastman would build on all of these techniques in his quest to make the camera as convenient as the pencil. And he would succeed.
So it is a combination of technological talent, entrepreneurial talent, and vision. If there is a thing called genius, Eastman was a genius.
George Eastman's invention and inspiration put into motion a photographic revolution.
Mr. Eastman had a lot of patents to his name, like there's 32 of them. He really worked hard to make photography simple enough so that everyone could be able to take pictures.
The 5-letter trademark he made up in 1888, K-O-D-A-K, Kodak, became one of the best-known brands in the world.
I deal with people from all over the world, and people will always say to me, if there's George Eastman that was involved with the company, who's Mr. Kodak?
There is no Mr. Kodak.
He actually made it up. He started with the letter K because his mother's maiden name was Kilbourne. He put it on the beginning and the end of the word, and he played around with vowels and consonants until he came up with something he felt was easily pronounceable, easily spelled in every language, and something that would be a trademark for his box camera.
In 1888, Eastman offered the Kodak, preloaded with film for 100 exposures. It cost $25. Processing the film was handled by Kodak. For the 12 years following, Eastman worked to create a camera to sell for $1. In 1900, he introduced it.
The most important thing that Eastman did was the Brownie camera. Prior to the Brownie, the common folk couldn't make images.
Simple, easy to operate, put the camera in the hands of masses. It's what made him his millions.
He understood how to transform this medium into the most powerful tool of communication the 20th century has ever witnessed.
This little black box, named after a popular children's character, was a hit. Kodak shipped over 150,000 cameras in the first year alone.
Mr. Eastman initially was overwhelmed by how well the public responded. He couldn't mass produce them quick enough.
He certainly understood marketing and created some of the greatest advertisements.
You press the button, we do the rest. The snapshot is born.
That slogan allowed everyone to get into the act of taking pictures. It was no longer a complicated chemical and mechanical process. It was something as easy as pushing a button.
He knew that by engaging women and children in the pursuit of photography through the Brownie camera, he was presenting to the world an opportunity to capture memories.
The Brownie was produced for 70 years. 125 models were made.
We do have most likely the largest Kodak collection in the world, but not every piece. I think we have about 2,000 Kodak cameras here.
One of these cameras, a Brownie in fact, ended up in the hands of a nascent genius.
The collection does contain Ansel Adams' Brownie. A second-hand camera was given to him about 1916. So even Ansel Adams' first camera was a second-hand Brownie.
Adams took his Brownie to the Yosemite Valley. Later, he would return to document the Great Sierras. Destined to become one of America's most famous photographers, he used this pure art form to create timeless images, like moonrise. The success of photography would be no surprise to Eastman.
He had an all-inclusive view of the product of photography, not only for his time, for the future.
That view included motion pictures and then talking pictures.
It is a great satisfaction to be able to speak to you through the medium of this wonderful invention, the talking film. During the past 50 years...
It all began with what looks more like a box than a movie camera. This is the cinematograph, pioneered by the Lumiere brothers in 1894. It both took and projected movies.
The cameras are quite rare. I think they made somewhere around 450 of them, and I think there's about 50 or so of them now.
But it was Eastman, working with Thomas Edison, who invented a flexible, rollable 35mm film strong enough to withstand repeated movement. It is still the standard today. Here in 1928, they celebrate Eastman's new 16mm Kodak film at a party at Eastman's Rochester home. At 900 East Avenue, George Eastman had perhaps the first home theater in America.
This is not a room that has been designed for receiving a public. No, it's a space in which George Eastman received his friends and said, as we might say, hey, come on over, let's look at a movie.
In 1902, George Eastman began construction on a 50-room Colonial Revival estate, which is now the centerpiece of the museum. Every aspect of this grand house reflects his penchant for detail.
Mr. Eastman loved music, and so in almost every room of the house, you will find some kind of musical instrument, like the Steinway piano in the living room. Mr. Eastman had installed an Aeolian pipe organ in his mansion right before he moved in 1905. We keep it in playing condition so that on a fairly regular basis, visitors can hear it play.
The museum has a photo album of 80 black and white prints of the home and garden taken during Eastman's day.
Mr. Eastman actually traveled the world and took this album and showed friends.
This album aided in the $2 million restoration of the house and grounds.
So that photograph album allows us to take these rooms and these spaces and restore them accurately because we have a good photograph of gardens from all different angles of most of the rooms in the house.
The architectural details in the billiard room, the personalized china in the dining room, and the view of the garden from his mother's bedroom are all as they were in Eastman's time. In addition to the items on display, the collection contains over 62,000 personal artifacts.
Things like Mr. Eastman's personal and business correspondence, Kodak advertising, photographs of not only all of Mr. Eastman's relatives, family, and friends, but also his trips, his vacations, the history of the Eastman Kodak Company.
This is his cigarette case, a Christmas gift from his chauffeur.
And Mr. Eastman loved it so much that he had a special silk pouch made for it, so when he put it in and out of his pocket, he wouldn't scratch it.
And this camera is actually a custom-designed shaving kit.
What they had done is put a mirror inside so that he could use that as a shaving kit, and in the back where the film would have been, there was a little brush, and then hidden on little compartments in the camera was the big huge leather strap that you would actually sharpen the razors on, a small little metal container of the little razor blades that were individually packaged.
Eastman's love of hunting shows in the profusion of accessories made of animal hooves all over the house.
He did bring back some trophies from East Africa. He brought back an elephant, which now hangs, or the reproduction of it hangs in our conservatory.
His adventures are now legendary.
George Eastman was making a movie of a charging rhino. She came closer and closer. And it was George Eastman's call when his colleague standing next to him would shoot. And he did so only at the very last minute. Afterwards, he was asked, "Mr. Eastman, why is it that you waited until the last minute?" And he replied, "Gotta trust your staff."
Eastman's 1926 film of one African adventure is surely fascinating. Safaris aside, George Eastman's contribution to the movie industry was not as a filmmaker, but as a maker of film.
In 1931, Mr. Eastman was invited to be an honorary life member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences.
For his contributions to the development of the motion picture industry.
It sort of shows Mr. Eastman's connection and the respect that they had for him in Hollywood.
It seems only natural that today the George Eastman House is one of the premier film archives in the world, engaged in the preservation and restoration of the movies themselves.
We have a collection of approximately 25,000 films made between 1894 and the present time. We have one of the largest collections of silent films worldwide, the largest collection of original Technicolor negatives anywhere in the world. And we have a stunning collection of film stills, posters, scripts, music scores, about 3 million items.
The museum's film archives of history's so-called greatest hits include everything from King Kong and the Phantom of the Opera, to Citizen Kane and Casablanca, to the films of Martin Scorsese and Spike Lee.
It is true that dealing with only one century of history has its advantages. But if you consider that there is about 1.5 billion moving images produced in 1 year, the task is already huge. At our movie theater, our white rectangle, the screen, is our exhibition gallery. The cinema is a gallery itself, the difference being that we have only one wall and one very, very big image shown every night.
This little-known gem, a 14-minute silent film from 1912, got lucky. It was chosen for the collection.
History is made of masterpieces, of commercial films, of routine films, of eccentric films and bad films. If you take only the masterpieces, you will only get the best. And the best is great, but it's not a whole picture. I was attracted precisely by the fact that this film had no reputation whatsoever. And then I saw it, and it's magic. It is perhaps one of the most moving films made during the first 20 years of cinema.
But film is fragile, and it is not forever.
Film is like a human being. It has a lifespan, and sometimes we feel like we are doctors. I like the idea that the public of the 22nd century will look at our choices, will understand our culture by looking at what we saved.
Motion pictures has such a glamorous appeal to it. People don't realize what's actually behind the set. Equipment that's used in motion pictures tends to be very industrial looking.
Behind the scenes of enduring Technicolor classics such as Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz was this gigantic piece of mechanical ingenuity.
The collection contains a 3-strip Technicolor camera. It runs 3 rolls of black and white film simultaneously, exposed through red, green, and blue filters. Loaded with film, it's going to weigh somewhere around 220 pounds.
The cameras themselves may last through the ages. Saving the film is another matter.
The primary reason for the interest in film preservation has to do with the surprise that comes with the awareness that so much needs to be saved. It is not enough to love movies in order to be a preservationist.
In 1996, the museum established the first school in North America to teach the restoration, preservation, and archiving of motion pictures.
Blanks, scratches to see if it's anything that could have been alleviated.
For us, these people who will end up working in laboratories, museums, archives, festivals all over the world, are like messengers of our mission. Our most important restoration projects include the reconstructed version of The Lost World, the 1925 version.
The first great monster animation classic.
There are classic films that are shown on TV all the time. And then we put them in our program at the George Eastman House, and we are afraid that they won't come. Well, they do come. And they pack the house. So that's the good news. A film seen on the big screen in its original form is still something better than a reproduction.
Indeed, our collections are formidable, preeminent, but it is the relationship that we enjoy with those who use those collections that is the profound part of our legacy.
There are many ways that we provide access to the collection, through exhibition or publication. Also through appointments. People can come, and they do.
Another way to access the collections is online. There are more than 140,000 images on their site.
The collection is useless if no one can get to it and no one can use it.
George Eastman's world revolved around his work and his philanthropy. He never married and had no children. He was a man in control of his own destiny, in life and in death.
When he knew he was dying of a very debilitating disease, spinal stenosis, that was only going to get worse, he did not want that to be the end of his life. He wanted to be in control of that to the end. And so that's why he took his own life.
"My work is done. Why wait?" he wrote. George Eastman died on March 14, 1932. And what work it was! The legacy of George Eastman's life is that he changed forever the way we see ourselves and each other.
He gave us our image, the image of ourselves, the image of those that we love, and he gave it to us without privilege.
Learn more about America's great museums at greatmuseums.org. You can order this episode or another Great Museums program on home video for $19.95 plus $4.95 shipping and handling. Call 1-888-227-5865 or order online at greatmuseums.org. Museums hold the treasures and tell the tales of the people and places that make America great. For Great Museums is provided by the Eureka Foundation, dedicated to the educational power of television and new media. Exercise your curiosity. Explore America's great museums.